The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as reporters scribbled in notepads and lawyers shuffled papers. It was the trial that had captured the entire city's attention, a case involving a suspected child kidnapper, Roger Kane, who sat emotionless at the defense table. His cold eyes scanned the room without a flicker of guilt. Dressed in a sharp gray suit, he looked more like a businessman than someone accused of stealing a child's innocence. But today's spotlight wasn't on him. All eyes turned toward the back as a small figure entered the courtroom, clinging tightly to the hand of her foster mother. Emily Harper, just 6 years old, walked slowly, her eyes wide and cautious. Her soft blonde hair was neatly brushed, and she wore a simple blue dress. But there was no sparkle in her eyes, only shadows of something she hadn't yet been able to speak of. Beside her padded a large golden retriever, Max, wearing a special vest that marked him as a certified courtroom comfort dog. Max had been assigned to Emily weeks ago, and though she hadn't spoken a single word since being found near a wooded area months ago, she always reached for Max, wherever she was. Max followed. Everyone in the room knew Emily hadn't said a word since the day she was rescued. Therapists believed she suffered from selective mutism, triggered by the extreme trauma she had endured. Attempts to draw out her memory had failed. No amount of coaxing, toys, or safe environments could bring her to speak. She simply sat, observed, and clung to Max. The judge, an older man with a warm demeanor named Judge Reynolds, had personally approved the use of Max in the courtroom. He'd seen comfort dogs help with stressed witnesses before, but never one quite like Emily. She wasn't just quiet, she was locked away, somewhere deep inside herself. As Emily was led to the witness stand, the room went completely silent. Cameras had been banned for her protection, but that didn't lessen the gravity of the moment. The prosecution had one goal, just one word from her. Any word, any signal. Something that could connect Roger Kane to the crime. Because despite the evidence, footprints, a partial fingerprint, a red van seen leaving the scene, there was no direct testimony. No one had heard her say, "That's him." Max sat at her feet as she curled into the witness chair, her hand still on his fur. Her foster mother sat in the front row, tears already forming in her eyes. Judge Reynolds leaned forward gently. "Emily, it's okay. You don't have to say anything if you're scared. Max is right there. You're safe." A trained child psychologist, sitting nearby, tried to ask the first question. "Emily, do you remember when you met Max?" Emily didn't respond. Her eyes didn't move. The courtroom held its breath. After several minutes of silence, the psychologist paused. Then, softly, Max nudged Emily's leg with his nose. It was subtle, gentle, but something in that moment shifted. Emily's hand moved. She pointed downward at Max. Then slowly, so softly that the court microphone barely picked it up, she said 2 words. "He knows." The courtroom froze. The stenographer, stunned, stopped typing. The bailiff blinked. Even Judge Reynolds stared forward, unsure he'd heard right. Emily, still pointing at Max, repeated herself, this time louder. "He knows." Max stood up suddenly. His ears twitched. His gaze locked directly onto Roger Kane. Emily turned her eyes toward the man across the room and whispered again, almost trembling, "He knows." Roger Kane's face turned visibly pale. The air in the courtroom grew heavy. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling behind them. The dog's sudden alertness. The way Emily had finally spoken, and the intensity with which she pointed not just at Max, but beyond him. Everyone in that courtroom realized something had just shifted, and no one was prepared for what was about to come next. The courtroom was still as stone. Emily's voice, tiny, clear, and entirely unexpected, hung in the air like a bell after it's been struck. "He knows." The judge blinked, and the attorneys turned to one another in disbelief. It wasn't just that. She had spoken. It was what she had said. Those two words seemed charged with meaning, as though she had unlocked a hidden door that no one else could open. Roger Kane shifted in his seat. It was the first time he showed visible emotion. His composure faltered for a split second. His jaw clenched. His right hand twitched slightly on the table. Subtle but noticeable. Max, the golden retriever, rose to his feet again, standing rigid beside Emily. His gaze narrowed, ears pulled slightly back, and his body trembled with tension. The trained comfort dog was known for being calm in the most chaotic situations, but now he was different. He wasn't just standing, he was alert, focused, ready. The psychologist near Emily leaned forward, whispering gently, "Emily, sweetheart, can you tell us more? What do you mean by he knows?" Emily didn't answer with words. She looked across the courtroom again, locking eyes with the man at the defense table. Her small hand, still shaking slightly, raised and pointed not at Max this time, but directly at Roger Kane. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised his hand for silence, but even he couldn't hide the intensity in his eyes. Max suddenly growled. A deep, guttural rumble that reverberated off the wooden walls of the courtroom. It wasn't an aggressive bark, it was a warning. A signal. Something instinctual. The bailiff moved toward the dog, concerned, but Max didn't. Move from Emily's side. His gaze never left Kane. Roger's defense attorney stood quickly, whispering something in Kane's ear. Kane leaned away, uncomfortable, his face now flushed. Judge Reynolds addressed the court. "Let the record show that the witness, Emily Harper, has just spoken and pointed toward the defendant. The courtroom dog, Max, has reacted visibly and audibly to the same individual." Kane leaned back in his chair, gripping the table edge. For the first time, he looked less like a man defending himself, and more like a man being hunted by truth. The prosecutor, a composed woman named Dana Keller, stood cautiously. She walked to the edge of the witness stand, her voice gentle. "Emily, is this the man who hurt you?" Emily hesitated. Max looked up at her, tail still, body tense. She touched his ear softly, then nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "He locked me in the basement." A collective gasp went up. Her voice cracked on the last word, but the message was crystal clear. For weeks, investigators had only been able to guess where she had been kept. Now, for the first time, they had confirmation. The defense attorney jumped up. "Objection. This is highly irregular. She's been nonverbal for months. We cannot verify the state of her memory." The judge raised a firm hand. Overruled. The witness is clearly speaking under no pressure, and the dog's reaction supports her identification. Continue. Max moved closer to Emily's leg, pressing against it like a shield. She reached down, resting her hand on his head. Her body relaxed slightly, and for the first time, a hint of life returned to her posture. Emily looked around the room, then added, "He took Max's vest. That's why Max remembers him." The revelation was like a bolt of lightning. Months ago, the police had discovered Max's comfort vest missing when Emily was found. They'd assumed it was lost in the woods. Now they knew it had been taken by the kidnapper. Dana Keller turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request immediate authorization for a new search of the defendant's residence and vehicle. If Max's vest is there, it further corroborates this child's statement." The judge nodded. "Granted." As court adjourned for the day, every single person in the room walked out changed. Emily had spoken. Max had reacted. The truth had cracked open, and it was only the beginning. The courtroom was still echoing with Emily's words as the bailiff escorted her out gently. The judge had declared a recess, but no one moved right away. Everyone was still processing what they had just witnessed, a 6-year-old girl breaking. Her silence to name her kidnapper, supported by a dog's inexplicable, powerful reaction. Roger Kane sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously. Kane nodded, wiped his palms on his pants, and took a sip of water with trembling hands. He looked nothing like the confident man who had walked into court just hours earlier. Meanwhile, Max was now being carefully examined by his handler, Officer Lacey Grant, a seasoned canine officer with a reputation for precision and empathy. She crouched beside the dog in the hallway outside the courtroom, gently stroking his fur. "He's never reacted like that before," she said quietly to the attending psychologist. "He's trained to be calm, especially in courtrooms." But when that little girl said, "He knows," something snapped into place. Inside the courtroom, Judge Reynolds called for the trial to resume. The mood had shifted. Kane's defense team appeared visibly rattled. Across the room, Prosecutor Dana Keller looked more determined than ever. "I'd like to enter into evidence the immediate request for a search of the defendant's property, including his vehicle, based on the witness testimony and the dog's behavioral confirmation," Keller said. "Granted," the judge replied. "We will adjourn until law enforcement completes the search. I want accurate, timely updates delivered to this court by morning." Back at Kane's house, officers arrived with a warrant in hand. The property was quiet, a modest two-story home, on the edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence. Officers moved swiftly, scanning every inch. In the garage, they found the red delivery van, a vehicle long suspected, but never definitively linked to the abduction. As they opened the back doors of the van, the scent of dust and old metal hit them. There was a blanket, a broken children's toy, and a utility bag. But what froze everyone was what Officer Grant pulled from the storage bin tucked under the driver's seat. A small, blue vest embroidered with the words, "Max Comfort K9. Grant held it up with a shaking hand. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the vest he was wearing when she disappeared." They snapped photos, collected the item for evidence, and continued the search. In the basement, behind a false wall covered in shelves, they found a hidden room. It was dimly lit and smelled of mildew. Inside were drawings, children's scribbles, one of a house, one of a van, and one of a dog. A shoe matching Emily's size lay in a corner, worn and dirty. No one spoke for a long time. Back at the courthouse the next day, the evidence was presented. Photos of the vest, a photo of Max's name tag on the fabric, pictures of the hidden room, and the scribbled drawings. The courtroom was filled with reporters now, buzzing about the developments. Keller stood before the jury and said, "What this child told us, what she remembered, was not imagination. It was fact." And Max, a professionally trained dog, recognized his own vest in the presence of the man who took him and that little girl. There is no coincidence here. There is truth. And it's time we listened to it. Kane stared ahead, lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tight. Emily, watching from the witness waiting room with Max beside her, hugged him tightly as she watched the courtroom live feed. She didn't say much, but she whispered one thing to her foster mother as she pointed to Kane's face on the screen. He thought I'd never remember. But she had, and now everyone else would too. The courtroom lights seemed brighter the next morning, as if the walls themselves had become alert to the truth rising inside them. Word had spread quickly. Emily's voice had returned. The comfort dog had reacted, and investigators had found damning evidence on Roger Kane's property. But what happened next stunned even the most hardened legal professionals. Emily returned to the courthouse, holding Max's leash. This time, she didn't look around nervously. She walked with quiet determination. Her foster mother walked beside her, and Max stayed close, his ears perked, tail steady. Everyone in the hallway paused as they passed. The prosecutor, Dana Keller, approached Judge Reynolds privately. Your Honor, based on Emily's emotional state and recent cooperation, I'd like to call her back to the stand. She's indicated she's ready to tell more. Judge Reynolds hesitated a moment and nodded. As long as she feels safe, we'll proceed with care. When Emily returned to the witness stand, the room went utterly silent. Max lay curled at her feet, head resting on his paws but eyes open, watching. Emily, the psychologist began. Gently, can you tell us what you remember about the place he took you? Emily sat quietly for a few seconds, then spoke softly but clearly. It was a basement. It smelled like mold. He told me nobody would find me because I didn't matter. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily didn't flinch. She was staring at Roger Kane. He took Max's vest and told me the dog belonged to him now. But Max didn't like him. Max growled. That's why he locked him outside. Dana Keller leaned forward. Did you see anything in the basement? Something that helped you know where you were? Emily nodded and pulled a folded paper from her pocket. The judge allowed her to hand it over. It was a drawing she'd made before she could speak. A drawing of a red van, a basement, and a dog. The same drawing now hung in the police evidence room, matching exactly what had been found in Kane's home. Kane's lawyer objected immediately. Your Honor, this is inadmissible. She's a traumatized child who could be coached. The judge shot him a sharp look. This child is speaking her own truth. Objection overruled. Emily looked at the jury, her voice small but steady. He wore a gray jacket and had a scar on his left hand. He gave me crackers and said I'd go home when he said so. But I knew he was lying. Prosecutor Keller turned to Kane. Mr. Kane, can you remove your left glove? Kane hesitated. The judge ordered it. Slowly, Kane removed the glove. A large, jagged scar ran across his palm. The courtroom froze. One of the jurors dropped a pen. The room buzzed with disbelief. Emily simply nodded. That's him. Max lifted his head, ears twitching again. He looked at Kane, and his fur bristled. A low growl escaped him once more. The judge leaned forward, almost in disbelief himself. This child, who hasn't spoken in months, has given us a first-hand account that matches forensic evidence, a known scar, and previously drawn pictures. Are we still pretending this is a coincidence? Kane's lawyer sat back, defeated. Emily's foster mother wiped tears from her eyes in the gallery. Reporters sat stunned, forgetting for a moment to write. Emily continued. I counted 10 steps from the door to the basement floor. The window was too small to crawl through. He left the TV on sometimes, so I'd hear voices. But I knew it wasn't. Real people. Max stood beside her, tail wagging slightly, like he knew she'd finished the hardest part. Judge Reynolds finally spoke. Miss Harper, you have shown extraordinary courage. The court commends you. You may step down. Emily nodded and stood. She looked over at Max. He never left me, she said. The courtroom didn't just witness justice that day. It witnessed something far greater, a child reclaiming her voice. And the beginning of the end for a man who thought no one would ever listen. Detectives moved quickly after Emily's testimony. Every word she had spoken lined up perfectly with the physical evidence. Her details, once dismissed as possible childlike imagination, were now treated as vital leads. The scar, the red van, the missing vest, the number of basement steps, even the moldy smell, all confirmed. That night, a full forensic team returned to Roger Kane's property with a different kind of urgency. This time, they weren't guessing. They were following a trail mapped by a brave little girl who remembered more than anyone realized. Inside the hidden basement room, they began cataloging everything carefully. A torn blanket, a cracked flashlight, empty food wrappers, and a small worn teddy bear with one eye missing. But the biggest discovery came when an officer pulled back the corner of the dusty rug. Etched into the concrete floor, almost hidden under grime, were 5 small scratch marks like tallies. Right beside them, in faint crayon, was a name. M. It was short, unfinished. But it was enough. "That's her," whispered Officer Lacey Grant. She was trying to write her name. One of the officers found a shoebox under the floorboards. Inside were items that seemed meaningless buttons, a broken pen, and a plastic keychain shaped like a dog paw. But then they noticed something chilling. The keychain had the name Max printed on the back in permanent marker. "This proves." "He took it from the dog," said Keller, reviewing photos back at her office. "He didn't just take Emily, he tried to erase everything that tied her to safety." The red van was impounded and examined thoroughly. In the back seat, they discovered traces of dog hair and fibers that matched the blue vest Max wore. A forensic specialist also uncovered faint fingerprints, too small to be Kane's. When cross-checked, they matched Emily's. Meanwhile, Roger Kane sat in a cold interrogation room, his hands folded, eyes staring blankly at the table. He hadn't spoken since the judge demanded he remove his glove. His attorney, pale and tired, tried to prepare a statement, but it was clear the tide had turned. Back in court the next morning, Keller stood confidently before the jury. "We now have the physical vest," she began. "We have the keychain. We have Emily's fingerprints in his van. We have a secret basement she described in stunning detail. And we have a trained comfort dog who reacted not once, but twice to the presence of the accused." She held up the photo of the crayon-scrawled M on the basement floor. She tried to leave her name just in case she wasn't found. Kane's face was pale, his lips tight, but a flicker of panic showed in his eyes. Then Keller played a recording of Emily's voice during her second statement. "He told me I wouldn't be found. But I knew Max would find someone. I just had to wait." The courtroom was completely silent. Emily, watching from the nearby chamber with her foster mother and Max at her feet, gripped the dog's ear gently. Max pressed his head against her leg. When the judge asked the defense if they had any evidence to offer, the attorney stood up slowly, voice strained. Double quotes, "No, Your Honor, we rest." Gasps rippled again. Even the jury looked surprised by the abrupt end. Kane didn't even look at his lawyer. He stared forward at nothing. His silence said what everyone already knew. He was cornered by the truth. A truth brought forth not just by evidence or legal pressure, but by a child's voice and a dog's memory. Emily had turned the tide, and Max had confirmed it with every instinct he possessed. This wasn't just a legal victory unfolding. It was a victory of innocence over cruelty, of courage over fear, and of loyalty over evil. Justice was no longer hope. It was now inevitable. The courtroom felt transformed when the trial resumed. What had begun as a fragile case, teetering on circumstantial evidence, was now a fortress of facts. Every juror now carried the weight of a child's whispered words and the haunting evidence found in Roger Kane's home. No one looked at him the same anymore. Even his own attorney seemed defeated. Emily was brought into the building through a private entrance. Though she wouldn't testify again, she had asked to be present with Max by her side. The judge approved the request. She sat quietly in a special room adjacent to the courtroom, watching the proceedings on a monitor, her hand resting on Max's fur. Kane appeared in court, looking tense and thinner, his suit now wrinkled. His arrogance had faded. He kept his head low, barely meeting anyone's eyes. Gone was the man who had confidently smirked through earlier hearings. Prosecutor Dana Keller stepped forward, her tone calm but forceful. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I want to take you back, not to the evidence, not even to the crime scene, but to the moment a little girl said 2 words that broke this case wide open. He knows." She paused, letting the words settle. Emily Harper may be small, but her courage is greater than many adults could ever display. She identified her abductor. She led us to the place she was held. She remembered his scar, his van, his voice, and even the number of steps into that basement. And most remarkably, she remembered Max the dog who never left her heart. A dog who, when reunited with the man who hurt her, reacted not out of confusion, but recognition. Keller motioned for Officer Lacey Grant to step forward with Max. The judge allowed the demonstration. Max entered the courtroom, calm but alert, tail low and eyes scanning. The room sat in stillness as he walked past the jurors and stopped directly in front of Roger Kane. He didn't bark this time. He didn't growl. He simply sat and stared hard and unblinking. Kane visibly swallowed. Officer Grant spoke. Max is trained not to react aggressively. But in both instances, when Emily pointed at him, and again when she said he knows, he reacted with instinct. It wasn't coincidence. Max recognized the man who stole not only a child, but also his own sense of duty. One juror wiped a tear. Another clenched his jaw. When Max was led back out, the silence in the courtroom felt sacred. The defense attorney stood with little hope. My client maintains his innocence, he said weakly. He cannot explain how the vest or the items were found on his property, but he denies the charges. We remind the jury that this case hinges on the word of a traumatized child and a dog's behavior. But no one was buying that anymore. Even the judge looked tired of the excuses. When the final evidence was shown, a video of the basement from Kane's home, matching Emily's every detail, right down to the cracked wall behind the shelf. The prosecution rested. The jury was dismissed for deliberation. Tension returned, thicker than ever. In the waiting room, Emily curled up beside Max, who rested his chin on her knee. Her foster mother held her hand. For the first time, Emily didn't look afraid. She looked ready. Judge Reynolds stood, looking over the courtroom one last time that day. I've seen many cases in my years on this bench, he said slowly, but rarely do I see justice begin with the bark of a dog and the whisper of a child. Let this remind us. Courage comes in many forms. The room stood silent as the judge exited. The jury had the truth, and all that was left now was the verdict. The next morning, the courthouse steps were swarming with reporters, cameramen, and citizens waiting for the verdict. People whispered the girl's name like it was a symbol of hope. Emily Harper, the child who broke her silence to bring the truth into daylight. Headlines had already dubbed her the girl who whispered justice. But inside, the weight of the case still rested on 12 individuals in a quiet jury room. Inside the courthouse, the tension was unbearable. Dana Keller sat calmly at the prosecution table, but her fingers tapped softly on her notepad. Across from her, Roger Kane sat pale and rigid. His suit was ironed again, but he couldn't fake calm anymore. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot. He hadn't spoken a word since the last session. Emily sat in the private viewing room with Max curled up at her feet. She had a small smile on her face, tiny, but genuine. Her foster mother sat beside her, gently holding her hand. It had only been 2 hours when the jury buzzed in. A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. That was fast. The judge re-entered. Everyone stood. The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. Madam Foreperson, Judge Reynolds said, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? Yes, Your Honor. A slip of paper was passed to the bailiff and then handed to the judge. He read it silently, then returned his gaze to the court. In the matter of the state versus Roger Kane on charges of kidnapping, unlawful confinement of a minor, and obstruction of justice, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. Gasps filled the room. Some were relieved sighs, others tears of release. One woman covered her mouth with both hands. The courtroom exploded into emotion. Kane didn't speak. He didn't protest. He simply stared straight ahead, as if the world had gone quiet around him. Dana Keller closed her eyes for a second, then nodded. The job was done. But more importantly, Emily had been believed. In the viewing room, Emily's foster mother burst into tears. Emily didn't. She looked at Max and smiled wider. "We did it," she whispered. Max wagged his tail as if he understood every word. The judge banged the gavel once, calling for order. Then he looked over at Kane with the full weight of justice in his voice. "Roger Kane, you are hereby remanded to custody to await sentencing. May this court never again have to face the horror of a crime against a child like Emily Harper." As bailiffs cuffed Kane and led him away, a strange calm settled over the courtroom. Not silence calm, as though the entire room exhaled in unison. But there was one more moment no one expected. Judge Reynolds motioned to Officer Grant, who had returned with Max after the verdict. The golden retriever sat by her side, tail gently brushing the floor. This court recognizes that the bravery shown in this case was not only human, the judge said, voice steady, but also canine. Max, in your own way, you helped uncover the truth. You gave a child strength. You gave this court clarity. And you reminded all of us that sometimes the heart knows more than the mind. The entire courtroom stood in applause. Max tilted his head in confusion, but wagged his tail excitedly. Emily, still watching on the screen, clapped softly, along with everyone else. News crews outside captured the crowd's reaction. It wasn't just justice, it was inspiration. That day, the courtroom didn't just convict a criminal. It honored a child's courage, a dog's loyalty, and a truth too strong to stay buried. And while Roger Kane was escorted out in silence, Emily Harper walked quietly into a new chapter of her life, one filled with hope. The world had heard her and believed her. Weeks after the courtroom, clapping faded and Roger Kane was officially sentenced to life without parole. The story of Emily Harper and her signal to Max continued to inspire people across the country. News outlets replayed the dramatic courtroom footage, especially the moment when Max sat and stared at Kane, confirming the child's silent truth. For many, it was more than a trial, it was a miracle. Emily was now living in a warm, safe home with the Clark family, her new foster parents who had filed for permanent adoption. Their home was surrounded by trees and laughter, nothing like the cold basement she had once been locked inside. And best of all, Max was with her forever after the trial. The police department made a special exception and allowed Emily to officially adopt Max. Officer Grant had no objections. In fact, she helped make it happen. "Max has made his choice," she said. "He belongs with her." Emily's room now had drawings on the wall, pictures she had made of her, and Max standing in front of a house with sunshine overhead. There were books on her shelf, teddy bears on her bed, and at night, Max always slept right beside her. Therapists worked with Emily regularly, but she didn't need much prompting anymore. She had begun talking more, laughing more, and even started attending school part-time. At first, she was shy, but after she told the class about Max, how he was a hero dog who had helped save her, she made more friends than she could count. At a school assembly a month later, Emily was called up on stage. The principal presented her with a small medal and a certificate for bravery. "We often think heroes wear capes," the principal said, holding the microphone. "But sometimes they wear pigtails and carry dog treats in their pockets." The audience laughed gently, then gave her a standing ovation. Back at home, things grew even more normal. Emily learned how to ride a bike, started baking cookies with her foster mom, and watched cartoons every Saturday morning with Max. He had his own bed in her room now, though he preferred curling up right beside hers. One evening, while watching the sunset from their porch, Mr. Clark sat beside Emily and asked, "Do you ever think about that day? The one in court?" Emily nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, but I try to think about the part after. When Max came to me, when people clapped, when the bad man went away." "You were so brave, Emily," he said gently. She looked down at Max, who gave her hand a small lick. "I wasn't brave alone," she whispered. "I had Max." The Clarks finalized the adoption 2 months later. Emily Harper became Emily Clark, and she wore her new name like a badge of honor. Her case inspired police departments nationwide to look deeper into canine units and their ability to connect emotionally with victims. Max became a quiet symbol of hope and even received the National Service Dog Medal for his role in Emily's rescue. Years later, when Emily stood at her high school graduation, she gave a short speech. "There was a time I thought my voice didn't matter," she said, her voice steady. "But someone once told me that even the smallest whisper can echo through the world. All it takes is one person or one dog who listens." Max, now older but still loyal, sat at the front row wearing a graduation cap custom-made just for him. He wagged his tail as the crowd clapped. That night, Emily sat in her room, flipping through a scrapbook of news clippings, drawings, and photos. She paused at one picture, the moment she pointed in the courtroom, and whispered, "He knows." She touched the photo gently, then looked at Max. "Thank you," she said. Max closed his eyes and rested his head on her lap, as if to say, "You're welcome." And with that, their story born in fear ended in love, healing, and unbreakable friendship.